What is an opioid overdose? This could be something that a person simply just nods off. They fall asleep and they maintain their breathing. They can be aroused by verbal stimuli, so you call out their name and they can wake up. But this is just at the high end of it. The deeper end of it is when a person becomes so sedated that they lose their ability to wake up, they cannot speak, and they lose their ability to breathe. So opioid overdose in the worst case can impair a person's breathing, causing them to turn blue or cyanotic, and this can cause next damage to the brain and the heart, and eventually death. So opioid overdoses can stem all the way from minor toxicity, which is a person becomes sedated or sleepy, all the way to the point where they can impair breathing. What are the guidelines for an opioid overdose? It's an excellent question, and the first thing to do is to make sure that the environment is safe. Any bystander needs to make sure there's no danger to them, because obviously that is counterproductive. So to make sure that the person who's having an overdose, if they're awake, then they can just keep a close watchful eye on them to make sure that there's no impairment of their level of consciousness or slowing down of their breathing. However, there's a decrease in their level of consciousness. If they're not responding to you, if they're fallen asleep, the idea is to wake them up. You can call their name loudly. If they don't respond to verbal stimuli, then the next thing to do is to give them a painful stimulus, which is generally a knuckle into the sternum. That's a safe way that will wake up a lot of people from an overdose, and that might need to be repeated. Going further down the spectrum though, a person in an active overdose can lose the ability to breathe, and the obvious signs are discolored skin with blue or purple discoloration, but this is a stepwise approach. At first they're pale, then they would turn green colored sometimes depending on their colored skin, and then finally to a blue ashen color. That's an obvious sign of a respiratory emergency. In that situation, to get them down onto the ground on their back and to call for help, 911, and get your hands on a Narcan or a naloxone kit. In that kit, they have a barrier mask for respiratory assist. So this is mouth-to-mouth respirations. The emergency is that they've stopped breathing. We need to give them rescue breaths. And in the kit, which you'll see in another video, which I will show you in there, what's in the kit is a barrier mask. So this provides a safer, more sanitary way of giving mouth-to-mouth. It's not needed, however, if this is a loved one and they're stopped breathing, obviously mouth-to-mouth is the first thing. The next thing is to get the Narcan or naloxone kit. It's the same thing, it's the same drug, just different names. These come in different forms, as a intramuscular injection, which is a needle, or the other one is easier to give, and this is a intranasal spray, and it's just sprayed up the nose. Then to roll them on their side in case they might vomit, that's called the recovery position. And then to keep a close eye on them and to go through this again, to keep an eye on their mental status, to keep an eye on their respirations, because they could go back into lack of breathing. Finally, to get first responders there, to call 911, as I said earlier, and to keep a close eye on your loved ones. So to summarize, what are the guidelines for an opioid overdose is to watch for various levels of sedation in which the person progresses from lack of verbal stimulation because they're falling asleep, unconscious, lack of painful stimulation, no response to that. That suggests that there's imminent respiratory failure. To get them on the ground, on their back, into a position so you could administer the naloxone or mouth-to-mouth respirations, preferably mouth-to-mouth first, followed by the naloxone injection, and to get them in the recovery position on their side in case they vomit, so they're not aspirating or choking on the vomit, and finally getting help from an emergency medical responder. How to treat an opioid overdose. This is a life-threatening emergency. In most cases, some people could just simply have nodded off and they're not fully anesthetized, so they could be awakened by voice or by painful stimulus. So in that situation, the antidote is not needed because usually the opioid will exert its effects and then wear off and the person wakes up. As long as they can maintain their breathing and a wakeful state with stimulation, then they don't need the antidote. To play it safe, however, there's nothing wrong if a person's uncertain if they need the antidote or not. If the level of consciousness is impaired or fluctuating, then in that situation to give Narcan or naloxone, it's the same medication, and this is widely available free from most pharmacies. This the kit, it can be either an intramuscular injection, so by a needle, or by intranasal spray, which is easier to give. Either way, these can cause a rapid reversal of the sedated state and help improve the breathing status and help wake them up. Now, a person could fall back into a sedated mode and lose consciousness again because sometimes they've had a big overdose and the Narcan is not enough, so an additional dose of Narcan is given. Another thing that needs to be said is, along the spectrum, along the sedation spectrum, a person becomes unresponsive, as I said, to stimuli, whether it's voice, then pain, and then they stop breathing. The first thing to do in that situation is call 911. It's a respiratory emergency, and this can imply imminent death. The first thing to do is actually artificial respiration. Now, a lot of people are not comfortable with this, but this is life-saving. It's the quicker way before the Narcan can be given. Mouth-to-mouth respiration is what I'm talking about, where a few rescue breaths are given. The Narcan kits do have a respiratory protection device, so it prevents mouth-to-mouth contact, but it does allow airflow to be given from the first responder to the patient. So to summarize this, the opioid overdoses work by sedating the patient. At first they become unresponsive to verbal stimuli, then painful stimuli, then they could have a respiratory arrest in which they're not breathing. They may turn green and then blue. It's important at that point to call for help, to give rescue breaths from a barrier mask, or mouth-to-mouth is fine. People do not contract diseases this way. It's very rare. And then finally to give the Narcan, whether it's given by intramuscular or an injection, a shot to the muscle, or an intranasal spray, which is up the nose.